Warning: these stories are dark and mention pedophilia and graphic sexual details. Listener's discretion is advised. I'll be talking about relations with a minor, so I apologize in advance if it's triggering for some people. I'm 30 years old and I'm from Florida. I'll be going by the name Solace for privacy reasons. The story takes place in 2009, back in the MySpace days, and it has still left a longing effect on me 14 years later. I was 16 going to Largo High, and up until this point I had only dated 2 friends for a short period before this situation. As someone who felt different and an outcast, I was bullied and always wanted to have a best friend and long relationship. I thought I'd honestly never get one. Unfortunately, this was the first 5-year-plus experience. I wish it never happened. I used to be on MySpace all the time on certain bands' pages looking at all their photos, which is when I found out certain bands' pages, if you scrolled down, had a tiny box called Meebo where you could chat with people. I was always on Paramore's page, and I talked there daily. After a while, I met this guy named Ryan. We talked a lot about music, the bands we liked, and we even recommended bands to each other. Eventually, we had started dating and I was ecstatic. Even though it was a long distance thing, I didn't care. The problem? He was 24. I used to question the 8 years difference at that time, and he would always tell me, age is just a number. That or, well, you can't help who you fall in love with. I started believing it. As time progressed, sexual conversations happened. Over the phone stuff happened. Nudes happened. That makes me so nauseous to think about on now. Well, fast forward about 5 years. I'm 21 and I found out he was not the person in the pictures he sent, and yet I still stayed. Fast forward a few months, he gives me a password for his Facebook to help fix it. I thought that maybe it would be the same password for his email since I had this gut feeling that he might be cheating. It was the same. I saw a flood of emails from random people. It was all nudes. Pictures of teenage girls my age, women in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and the highest I saw was 60-something. I don't remember how many images and things I've seen. I also saw that he made a Meet Me account using the same copied and pasted message of his name, looking for a relationship, and using his mother's disease for sympathy. It was fucking disgusting. The feeling of being cheated on with one person hurts, but seeing it being well over 50+ people, I was broken. It put me in a deep depressive state where I stayed home for my GED classes, slept all day, and barely even ate. I tried confronting him and he denied that whole fucking thing, so I had stopped communicating for a while at this point. Later down the line, a female saw his Facebook that he had me in his relationship status, and she reached out. Apparently, while I was with him, not only was he soliciting nudes from girls and women, but he was also having an in-person relationship the whole time. She said the times I've called, he said I was a friend while they were in bed together. I told her about everything. The nudes, all of it. She said that she was going to confront him, and she called me back a few days later saying, "Well, I still love him and I'm staying with him. Don't bother our relationship." All I ever wanted during that was someone to believe and acknowledge what was happening, that it was wrong. It made me feel crazy and alone. The worst problem after all this time? My parents knew. They never even stopped it. My mom caught me sending nudes and got mad at me mostly. Never once did she go after him. And what makes it hurt the most? My mom tells me that's the reason for my dad's past abuse then and why he treats me the way he does now, because my mom didn't step in and do anything. If he knew and didn't stop it either, that makes him just as bad as her. At the present moment, I've healed most of my feelings from that time. I'm in a better state mentally, even though other traumatic events happened after that. Those stories will be for another day. I want to say to myself and to anyone else who's experienced something like this, it is not your fault, ever. We were children and we needed protection. We think we know everything at those ages, but we don't. That's where parents need to step in. Hell, anyone who's around and sees and hears needs to step in. Do something. As for this piece of shit, if you happen to hear this, Ryan, I hope you fucking rot for all the disgusting shit you did, you vile pedo. I used to love Tumblr. It has a well-deserved reputation for being a crazy website, but I used to be such a Tumblr girl from 2012 to 2014. When I was 14, it was 2013. I was a bit of an emo teenager. I'd go on there and reblog toxic posts romanticizing depression. It was a big thing back then, and although the posts were toxic, they did help me process my own emotions. I was struggling at the time because I was bullied in school for having a large nose by a group of boys. I felt so ugly, and they really knocked my confidence, which was already low. I guess this made me vulnerable, but ultimately what ended up happening was not the fault of my bullies. As I said, I was 14 when this took place. I followed a blog on there that posted stuff I liked. This person followed me back and we became mutuals, reblogging each other's stuff. One day he sent me a post that I'd shared and said something about it, and I replied. Conversation didn't begin right away. It was these types of interactions at first before we started to properly talk. We slowly began getting to know each other. It was a guy who I'll call Ethan. He told me he was 18 and I was honest about being 14. I thought he wouldn't want to talk to me anymore, but he didn't even care about my age. I remember that he told me that he was shocked because I seemed wise beyond my years based on my posts. I know that's stupid, but I didn't realize how predatory this was at the time. As time went on, we continued to talk. He told me about where he was from. He told me that he lived in the eastern United States, and I lived in Canada. I thought he was really cool. He told me that he was in college studying pharmacy, and he told me about his interests. I've always really loved smart guys, and I thought he was so smart for doing pharmacy. He also told me that he loved poetry and listened to Lana Del Rey. I posted about Lana Del Rey on my blog, and I'd share quotes all the time. I wonder now if he made that up to just lure me in. He claimed he could play guitar and piano, and that he was starting a band with his college roommates. This was swoon-worthy to me. I told him about myself too, my interests, and he seemed to love similar things as me. Again, I do wonder if he just studied my blog to get a feel for my interests. I remember opening up to him after talking to him for like 2 months. I had a really hard day in school, and I told him I was being bullied, revealing all of the details. It all came pouring out. He comforted me, and I'd never experienced that before. He seemed like he really understood. He shared his own experience of being bullied for having braces and being viewed as a nerd. He said it would be okay because now he was in college and doing well for himself, but that his bullies were all high school dropouts. I believed him, and talking to him felt like a weight was now lifted off my shoulders. Up until this point, we had never seen photos of each other. Due to the nature of my bullying, he assured me that I wasn't ugly, and he said he was willing to bet my nose wasn't that big at all. He ended up joking that he probably looked worthy of being bullied, but not me, and this ended up with him sending me a selfie. When I saw him, my heart honestly skipped a beat. I felt butterflies in my stomach. I thought he was attractive, and I suddenly felt really nervous. I remember telling him there was nothing wrong with how he looked, and he told me that he felt that way about me too, despite not having even seen me. He then started to say that he bet that I was pretty, and the boys bullying me probably liked me and just couldn't cope with how they felt. It felt like he was nudging me to send a photo. I was nervous, but I decided to just take one and send it. It took me like half an hour to get one I was satisfied with. I remember sending it and feeling like it was too good to be true. that this cool, hot 18-year-old guy was talking to little old me. He didn't reply for a while, and honestly, I was scared that he saw my photo and was repulsed. Then he responded, and I still remember it word for word. He literally said, "Wow, I'm always right. You are gorgeous." I remember reading his words over and over, and I felt like I was flying through the sky. I'd never been complimented like that before. My self-esteem was in tatters, and here was this older boy calling me gorgeous. I was so flattered, and I felt so special. I remember I told him that he didn't mean that, but he told me that he did and that I was so gorgeous. I couldn't help but blush, and the butterflies in my stomach intensified. After that, I felt closer to him. He encouraged me to stand up to my bullies, and he began complimenting me all the time. He started sending me random photos as he went about his day, like photos of him brushing his teeth in the morning standing at the mirror. I remember that he gave me a bedroom tour, and I gave him a tour of my room too. It must sound so silly, but thinking back to this bothers me. Ethan knew my age, and it must have been undeniable when he saw my bedroom. It really bothers me to think about things like that. Sometimes more so than the objectively worst things. Our chat started to shift, but it sort of felt like a natural progression. Obviously it wasn't, but I thought it was normal. Ethan started to ask if I'd ever had a boyfriend, ever kissed a boy, the usual. The answer was no, and he told me that he was shocked to hear that. I asked why, and he said that I was way too pretty to be single, and that he'd date me in a heartbeat. That made my heart skip a beat. I remember he asked if I had any idea what I did to him, and I didn't know what he meant, so I asked what he meant. He told me that I drove him crazy, and he sent a winky face. I didn't realize how sexual this was at the time, but I knew that he had to be saying that he liked me. At the same time, my self-esteem issues had me second-guessing if he really did like me or if I was just being dumb and misinterpreting him. After this, things only got more inappropriate. I didn't understand at the time that it was wrong, but it did feel wrong sometimes, which I'll get into. He ended up telling me a few mornings later that he woke up hard because of me. I knew what he meant, and it made me feel really embarrassed and uncomfortable. I had school, and I didn't reply because I didn't really know what to say to that. When I got home from school, he'd sent me 2 messages, both basically saying he was sorry if he made me uncomfortable. I replied back that it was okay. He told me that he only told me because he thought he could tell me anything, and I told him he could. I now know that this was him trying to be manipulative, but at the time I couldn't see it. The next morning, he messaged me again telling me the same thing had happened. This time I replied back saying, "Yeah," because I felt like I shouldn't ignore him, but it still made me uncomfortable. He replied saying yeah, and that he just couldn't stop thinking about me, even in his dreams. I thought this was sweet, and I told him that I thought about him all the time too. He didn't say anything sexual for a few days. That weekend we were talking at night, and he told me that he was probably going to wake up hard in the morning because he was talking to me. I didn't know what to say. I felt uncomfortable and awkward. Well, he then asked me if he turned me on, and if I touched myself and thought about him. This embarrassed me because I was only 14 and I'd never spoken to anyone like that before. I told him that I felt embarrassed talking about that, and I remember he apologized and said that he thought I was more mature. That made me feel like I was being stupid, and I was also scared of losing him, so I decided to engage in the conversation. I told myself this was normal and this is just what adults did, and that I was mature enough for it. Ethan basically told me that he liked my responses, and he said I was hot. I felt really awkward. I liked Ethan, and how I was feeling confused me. I cared about him and liked him, but I knew deep down something was up. I was too young for this, and I resented the fact that I couldn't feel more like an adult like him. The next part is really gross to say, but he told me that he wanted to eat me out. I didn't know what this meant. I knew about sex, but I didn't really understand all the slang. And again, I was only 14 years old. I admitted to not knowing what he meant, and he said it was something that boys did when they love a girl. I asked him if he loved me, completely disregarding everything else, and he said he did. It makes me cringe so badly, but I really believed it. I was so clueless. He sent me a gift through a Tumblr of a woman receiving oral sex, and he said again that he wanted to do that to me. I felt embarrassed like I often did. I couldn't imagine letting him do that to me. From this day on, he kept bringing up how much he wanted to do it, and I just felt so embarrassed. I couldn't understand what was wrong with me. I kept thinking that I should be alright with it, but it just didn't feel right. Ethan started posting NSFW gifs on his Tumblr. At least once a day he'd post something, and he'd put really cringy shit in the tags like, thinking about my girl. I knew it was aimed at me, and it made me feel uncomfortable. Some of the gifs were pretty intense, and it scared me. Ethan kept telling me that I was so mature for my age, and I was so hot and he couldn't get enough of me. One night he had started telling me all the stuff he wanted to do to me, and it was like virtual sex, as if he was really doing it. He would say to picture him doing X, Y, and Z, and I didn't know what to do. I partook in it, and it makes me cringe now. I didn't know what else to do other than go along with it because I didn't want to seem immature. Plus, I felt like I really loved Ethan, and I wanted to make him happy. I wanted to be with him, but I just wasn't ready for all this quite yet. When he started asking for photos of me in compromising positions, it was the beginning of the end. I said no because there was no way I could do that. Ethan wasn't understanding. He tried to pressure me. He told me that I needed to give him something since he couldn't be with me in person. And didn't I love him? Didn't I understand how much it hurt him not to be able to be with me? He said those things and more. I kept saying no, and Ethan wouldn't talk to me. I realized that I felt relieved to not be talking to him anymore. 2 weeks passed, and although I missed him, the relief I felt was telling me something was wrong. He finally messaged me, and he was acting like nothing had happened between us. Despite part of me not wanting to engage, I had started talking to him again. It didn't take him long to get sexual with me again. He started calling me sexy and started telling me he wanted me so bad, etc. I decided to tell him how I was feeling. I told him that I really loved him, but I felt like our relationship was going too quick. I wrote a really long message and I really thought it was reasonable, but when I sent it, he didn't reply for a long time. The next day he deactivated his account. I was devastated. The years passed and I never told anyone. I still haven't to this day. When I got my first boyfriend, I was 16, and everything just felt natural with him. I guess it was then that I started to realize Ethan was weird, but it wasn't until I was 18 when it fully hit me. I couldn't help but look at 14-year-olds and see how young they are. I thought about Ethan and how I could never be attracted to a 14-year-old. Yet he was attracted to me. I decided I had to push this down because I wasn't ready to confront it properly. But it wasn't easy to ignore, and I found myself thinking about it all the time. Nowadays, it isn't on my mind so much, but things bring it to the surface, and then I push it back down again. I'm embarrassed by the entire thing. I wouldn't say the experience traumatized me, but it definitely bothers me. Ethan was clearly a pedophile, and it scares me to think that he's out there hiding in plain sight. He isn't a 40-year-old grungy man. I can't help but think about him after all this time. I don't know what I should say to end this story other than I really hope anyone listening takes away a valuable lesson, which is to never talk to strangers online, especially those who are older when you're a child, and never talk to those who make you uncomfortable. It's really disgusting that he was talking to me about how he was, and he was clearly a predator. All I can say is that it still really bothers me to this day, and I suppose it always will. Hey everyone, that's about it for today's stories. If you have your own story that you would like to send, you can send it in at southerncannibal.com, or you can email it at southerncannibalstories@gmail.com. I look forward to telling your story. Have a good night or good day, everyone. And remember to always